Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Scorpin, and I'm standing here in my seminar room in southern Germany, in Bavaria, in a town called Andechs. It has a very famous monastery, which is just there. I can see it from here. And it's a beautiful spring day, 1 week before Easter. April 1st is Easter. And some of you might know me, and some of you probably don't know me, but in any case, I'm American, but I live here in Germany since over 22 years. And before that time, I had the incredible fortune of spending the last 6 years together with probably one of the greatest healers and mystics of recent time. He was fairly well known in Germany, that's why I'm here. And also throughout the world as the Magus Astrobolos, or as Daskalos. Daskalos is a Greek term for teacher or guru, and he was born Stylianos Ateshlis in 1912. And I reached the island of Cyprus in 1989, and was invited to stay, and I ended up staying for altogether 7 years, but until Daskalos had a stroke, and a year later, a little bit later, he passed over, and then I stayed another year before settling in Munich, Germany, to be with my wife, my future wife, Brigitte. And because Daskalos was so well known here in Germany, people started calling me up, and they said, you know, Paul, we know that you were close with Daskalos. Can you heal like he healed? And I said, Daskalos was an exceptional healer, miracle healer, but I can try. And then I started to work on people, and then people started asking me if I would teach them how to heal. And together with my wife, we started giving them seminars about healing. And this is now over 22 years ago. And so what I do is I teach healing. I lay my hands on people, and I also lead spiritual travels to the Holy Land, and recently to Patmos, up 2 weeks ago to Luxor, Egypt, and also soon to Ephesus. In any case, the talk that I want to present today in English, ik wil das auf Deutsch machen in 2 Wochen, wenn für die das nicht genug Englisch verstehen. Dann ich mache das auf Deutsch bald, okay? Versprochen. The talk that I'm giving today is on spiritual healing in a paradigm shift, okay? Because many of us are aware that we're experiencing globally a massive paradigm shift, thank God. Paradigm shifts, the term paradigm shift describes a period when all of our belief systems and all of our lifestyles built up on these belief systems suddenly no longer function. They've come to an end. They don't work anymore. And then we have to, collectively, we have to contemplate what do we want to do now? If a lot of our belief systems don't function anymore and no longer apply, how are we going to live with each other, live with ourselves? And that's where we're standing now, clearly. And I'm a student of consciousness, partly because I'm a healer. So I get to work with quite a few people, and I learn every day what they're facing inside of themselves and amongst each other. And I've been noticing since about 2009 that there's been a major that a shift started in consciousness, and the shift had a lot to do with that we were asked to re-examine our spirituality and religions. And I started to do that. I started to explore that, and I quickly reached the conclusion that organized religion throughout the world today they are fairly puritanical. They are often against life, and they all share a massive problem with sexuality. They all struggle with the human aspect of us, the emotions and desires and injuries. And how did that come to be? Well, that's the question. And then I'm a student of Christian mysticism because of Dasclus was one of the greatest Christian mystics. And I started to look into what the development of Christianity, how it developed apart from what Jesus was and what he taught and what he did. I wanted to look at how Christianity was formed in the early centuries. And it became apparent that Christianity, organized Christianity, is built upon the New Testament. And the New Testament only came into existence nearly 300 years after the crucifixion. And the New Testament is a composition of 27 books, starting with Matthew and ending with the Apocalypse. And the architects of the New Testament, a lot of them experienced Jesus personally. Not the architects, but the authors of the 27 books and other books experienced Jesus personally, and some of them recorded what they heard. And Christianity was in danger, of course, for the first few centuries, persecuted, until Constantine decided it would be the state religion of the Roman Empire. The architects of the New Testament were, as far as we know, they were all men, just like the architects of the Old Testament were all men. And it's always men that decide, okay, we have an inspired teacher or teaching, and we have to codify it. Okay? And the men that want to codify a new teachings like Christianity, they all have something deeply in common. And that is they have a massive problem with this world. That's why they are so attracted to a teaching which might show them how to go away from karma or sin or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of these men who decided to volunteer their time to form the New Testament, they were all Jews, of course, and they were deeply influenced by the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, we read about a paradise, Garden of Eden, when we were in union with the Godhead. First Adam and then Adam and Eva. And then because of Eva, a woman, we were exiled. And so a lot of these men, up until quite recently, even now, a lot of people believe that a woman is responsible for us being here in this world, and we're here as punishment for a sin. And these men who decided to form the New Testament, they were presented. I'll show you a book. This is common now. This is a book written called The New Testament by scholars. It's called the New Testament. It's edited and commentary by Hal Taussig, and they can prove and they argue that these 27 books of the New Testament were selected out of maybe 100 books or text written about Jesus and what he was like and what he taught. And so the New Testament represents 25% of the text from that time. And then that begs the question, why are these 27 books there, and what happened to the other 75%? And that comes to where we're standing now. A lot of the other books, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philippos, the Gospel of Maria Magdalena, they were quickly deemed as heretical, and you would be threatened with a death penalty if you read them. It was forbidden to read them. And interesting enough, these books like the Gospel of Thomas, we just made a German film about that here last year. You get a whole different picture of who Jesus was, who Maria Magdalena was, and that this is not a punishment here. You read time and time again in the Gospel of Thomas that Jesus says this is a paradise here. So that we've been living with the idea that this is a prison for 2,000 years, partly because of we allowed a description or a conception of what Christianity is to be formed by men over 1,700 years ago. So these men, they all shared something in common, and that was they shared misogyny. Misogyny is a Latin word for the hatred of the feminine or hatred of women. Peter is well known as somebody who had a massive problem with Maria Magdalena. Massive. And St. Paul, who I'm named after, it says in the books of Timothy, Paul states very clearly that women should sit in the corner and keep their mouths quiet. So why is that interesting now? Why is that important? Well, here, if we look at what happened to us, it was quite dramatic. Okay, so here's a figure, and in Eastern mysticism and in Western mysticism, a lot of you are familiar with the chakra system. So we have 7 main chakras: the crown chakra, third eye, throat chakra, heart chakra, solar plexus, sacral chakra, and root chakra. Now, and this gets to the paradigm shift that we're very much in the middle of. If we develop ideas 2,000 years ago that religion is there to free us from the world, and that the divine feminine or the feminine period is not allowed to partake in the formation of a religion or in the synagogues or in the churches and so forth, then we're going to allow the masculine to define not only, for example, Christianity, but also then to define, to an extreme extent, Europe. First, the Roman Empire, and also throughout Egypt and so forth, based on the 27 books of the New Testament. And what that means is the 27 books of the New Testament were carefully chosen to give us a Christianity which is built up on sin and fear and guilt and shame. And basically the body, the human body and the chakra systems is divided into 2 parts. We have a part which belongs to the lower body, which belongs to the root chakra, sacral chakra, and solar plexus, which is relatively personal. In other words, everything that we experience in the subconsciousness or in the solar plexus, sacral chakra, and root chakra is extremely personal. Extremely personal. There's nothing about it which is universal or objective. Okay? And the thing about the upper chakras, the throat chakra until the crown chakra, the upper part of the body, is it has the capacity to think universally, okay? And it has the capacity to experience the self and each other and Christianity and the world as rather unpersonal. Okay, so when you make a decision 2,000 years ago that Christianity should be basically masculine, then it pulled a lot. It pulled Christianity into the upper chakras here, completely actually, and it rendered the lower part of the chakra system as too human, too feminine, too emotional, too flawed. And that's created a huge split in the personality and in the culture. And interesting enough, I had the good fortune in December of being in Ephesus in Turkey. And I spent some time there, and now I'm going to be leading a group there in May. At the time of Jesus in the Holy Land, in Ephesus, the Greek and then the Roman culture were celebrating the divine feminine as Artemis and as Isis. And I had the blessed fortune about 2 weeks ago to lead 16 people through Luxor down to the Aswan, going deeply into the old religion, disowned religion of the Egyptians, which at the time of Christ were celebrating not only Isis as a goddess, but also Hathor and a lot of and Sekhmet and a lot of nice balance of both male aspects and female aspects. So you wouldn't have necessarily this split here at all. You wouldn't have this split. This split is relatively new. And this split started to then transpire even more over the course of the centuries. For example, all priests in the early Catholic Church, up until year 400, they were all married. They were married because rabbis are all married and have children because that's because God had children. And it is suddenly in Christianity in the year 400, I believe, it was forbidden for priests to be married. And so the problem with then sexuality became even more entrenched. And this split became even greater and greater. Now, to the paradigm shift that we're experiencing. We are in the middle of a massive paradigm shift. And we are aware that politics has become extreme. Both domestic politics, like for example in America last year and continuing, and also international politics has become extremely stressed. And it can be connected with this, right? Because the female aspect has very, very little influence on politics. Very little influence on politics. And we've also noticed that the nuclear family throughout the world and marriage in general has become extremely stressed, especially in the last decades, because the female aspect in the family and in us and in the culture is starting to wake up and starting to realize that this has happened to that. It's not that it's a victim, but it's realizing that this happened, and it doesn't no longer, the female aspect no longer wants to be defined by the male aspect. Thank God. Okay. And other examples are, they're massive. The school system is, at least here in Germany, the school system's not functioning very well at all. The children are under a massive amount of stress to the point where they hardly even have a childhood anymore. And of course, as we see in America, we have that, and then we have the problem coupled with violence. And the environment around us, Mother Earth, she's showing us nearly every day that she cannot take the abuse. And she's showing us through rising temperatures and rising water tables and through tsunamis and through storms and hurricanes and cold and heat, that she's no longer in balance because we're no longer in balance. Okay? So what we have here is we have a separation. We've built up practically the whole world. All of the countries are built up primarily by religious belief systems. And all religious belief systems have a massive problem with what's essentially human and with the world. Okay? So we notice now that we have to make major changes, and we have to make them quickly. Otherwise, we have no future. And change starts with us. In other words, we have to reconcile within us, and that's the offer of our time. We have to reconcile within us that we are both, we have both the capacity to be universal and to be very personal. So we have to reconcile with the personal. Sounds very simple, but it's not. Especially in spirituality or mysticism. As a matter of fact, a lot of us are aware of the left and the right brain hemispheres, that the right brain hemisphere, which controls the left side of the body, is essentially universal and feminine and intuitive, and the left brain hemisphere is rather personal and controls the right side of the body. And that I would like to show you another book which is, I think, excellent, and it says everything about where we're standing right now. It's written by an Englishman who's very much respected, Ian McGilchrist, and it's called The Master and His Emissary. And the subtitle is The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. And Ian, I think he goes so far as to say that the Western civilization is constructed up to 90% from the left hemisphere of the brain. That we only allow our culture to experience 10% of the right hemisphere. And for those students of Daskalos, I will share something very intimate. Daskalos in 1994 in June suffered a massive stroke, a debilitating stroke, and was paralyzed and speechless for the next 14 months. And Daskalos experienced a stroke in the left hemisphere. In fact, the left hemisphere in Daskalos was shut down. And when I first got to Cyprus, Daskalos was giving talks in the Stoa. And practically every week, Daskalos would say in the middle of the talk that the body is a prison. And it comes from the Bible that the flesh is weak and the spirit is strong. And he said that for a number of weeks, and I listened to him, and I got to notice the people who were coming because I was responsible for them to some extent. And a lot of them came from Germany, or they came from Switzerland or America, and they also experienced the body as a prison. And a lot of them even confessed to me that they had suicidal thoughts. And so one day I went to Daskalos and I said, Daskali, you know, listen, I've been talking to some people who've come here, and you teach that the body's a prison. And they come here with that belief, and you confirm it. And for these people, you are Christ-like. You are like Jesus. You know, your grace and your wisdom and your love is nourishing to them, and it means so much to them. But when you say, as a great teacher, that the body is a prison, and then they go back to Munich or go back to Vienna, they're going to go back with the confirmation that the body's a prison, and maybe it might even lead to suicide. Because you're such a great teacher and you feel the same way. And he promised me that he would never teach it again. And he didn't teach it again. But then 5 years later, he suffered this massive stroke. We had to carry him down on a blanket to the ambulance. And I was with him then for the next 14 months, most of the time, except for a few trips. And I noticed that Daskalos, because of the stroke, he reconciled himself with the body, and essentially he reconciled himself with the earth. For me, when I saw that happen over 14 months, I was experiencing a great, great soul going through his last initiation. And essentially that's a reconciliation from the crown chakra with the root chakra. Because the crown chakra stays in Garden Eden or in paradise, and the root chakra is deeply involved in the world. And they basically are divided from each other until we reach the point where we will see both as God. So we have this division then between the left and the right brain. We have the division between the upper and the lower, and we have the division between the right side of the body, which is essentially masculine, and the left side of the body, which is feminine, because it's passive. And we have a massive division between the masculine and the feminine in any case. And everything around us is showing us that it doesn't function anymore. That's the paradigm shift. We have to collectively then think about how we're going to build a future together, which will by definition be built upon more harmony and more integration, and less duality and less abuse. And as a healer, I started healing, like I said, in 1996. And I based my healing technique on Daskalos, how he treated the body and how he worked. And as I said, I developed my own technique, which I teach. And at that time, 22 years ago, I was giving individual sessions. People would come to me 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And it helped them a lot. And then some people came to me who were more chronically ill. In other words, they had a serious illness like hepatitis B or a problem with cholesterol, or they were emotionally ill with depression. And I treated them a number of times and they got better, but I wasn't satisfied. I wanted them to get much better. And some of you know, if you're familiar with Daskalos, that his spirit guide is John the Apostle John, who wrote the Gospel of John. And John befriended me in my time in Cyprus. And after Daskalos gave his body back to the earth, John stayed with me, and he's still with me, thank God. And in my frustration, I just said to John, I said, John, what can I do now for these folks who are suffering something chronic? This is the definition of chronic. And he said, Paul, why don't you read my gospel again? And I said, you know, John, I've read your gospel so many times since I was with Daskalos and since his passing. Here's my favorite copy of the Gospel of John. It's just tiny. The Gospel of John, the Apostle. And I said, okay, John, I'll read it. And then I started reading it very carefully, and I noticed that every healing in the Gospel of John took place on the Sabbath, the seventh day, or just before the Sabbath, symbolized either by the sixth day or by the sixth hour. And the healings that occur in the Gospel of John are not only physical healings, but they're transformations of the personality, bringing the people into a divine state, like the blind man, like the paralyzed man. It actually brings them into their hearts. And John said to me, tell them to come to you 7 times, which symbolizes the Sabbath, creation. And tell them to come every 3 or 4 weeks. And I started doing that. The people agreed. And it started a tremendous transformation of physical and emotional in these people. And I was very pleased with this, and I was glad to teach it, and I still teach it. This is my passion. And more and more people started to come to me to go through this seven treatments. And as I said, in 2009, a lot of us became aware that things were changing quickly. And I noticed the presence of a feminine energy in my treatments. I've come to know it as the Sophia, the divine Sophia. She's a beautiful presence. And all of a sudden, the 7 treatments in 2009 started to get much stronger. Much stronger. And what I teach as a healer and as a teacher of healing, I teach how important that a healer like myself is passive. Okay, many people, if you read the Magus of Strovolos, the Magus of Strovolos from Markides, my teacher, you have the impression that Daskalos was extremely powerful and active as a healer, and he wasn't. He said he never called himself a healer. He never called himself a teacher. He was the model of humility, Christ-like humility. And Jesus himself said, I don't do anything, my Father does everything through me. When I started to heal 22 years ago, I wasn't passive. I didn't know passivity was the key. And now I, knock on wood, I believe I'm nearly completely passive. And why is that important? Well, it's a very logical thing. When I'm passive, then the Divine Mercy is active. And when I'm active with my egoism or my pride or my need for confirmation from a session treatment, then I leave too little place for the Divine Mercy to heal. And with this 7 treatments that a client gets 7 treatments, passivity is absolutely required, because the moment that somebody says they want to go through the 7 treatments, there is a perfect plan drawn up in heaven for these people. Because I wrote an article about this about a decade ago. I'll send it to anybody who wants, but Jesus said that God knows every hair on our head. Every hair on your head is numbered, which is hard to believe. But when I started guiding people through these 7 treatments, and I saw how individually each one of them was treated, and absolutely individually, then I started to believe that. I believe that Divine Mercy knows exactly what all of us are doing down here and what all of us have gone through. So in the last 8 years, because now we're in 2018, so 9 years actually, the 7 treatments have become increasingly stronger. It used to be that within the 7 treatments, a client would go through one very deep process after the 3rd, 4th, or 5th treatment, where a lot of karma was removed from them and they were lost, or they went through physical discomfort because it was going over the body. And now, in the meantime, people have a strong reaction after every treatment. And what that is it's a confirmation that things are changing quickly. It's a confirmation that we don't need this anymore. And the Divine Mercy is allowed to take it out of our system. Okay? And that's the beauty of spiritual healing, is that if we try to solve this ourselves through the intellect or through reason, how far will we get? In other words, how far will we get to reconcile the left and the right hemispheres? How far will we get if we reconcile the lower chakras with the upper chakras, that the heart chakra can finally breathe? How much success will we have if the Divine Masculine says to the Divine Feminine, or the Masculine says to the Feminine, I'm sorry that I defined you for the last 2,000 years, and I'm sorry that I called Maria Magdalena a prostitute for 1,400 years. I'll try to stop. That doesn't work so well. Not fast enough in any case. When we enter a paradigm shift, something beautiful happens, and we're in the middle of one now. You can even say that Mr. Trump in the States is the full embodiment of this. Donald Trump is the full embodiment of the last 2,000 years of consciousness, built up on a very complex sense of the self, built up on dominance, built up on a bizarre sexuality, built up on misogyny, built up on hate. That is a result of this. So when we reach a paradigm shift like we are now, normally the heavenly spheres, they respect our free will, and they don't interfere with what we do here, because we have to have experiences. But when things get so out of control like they are now, then this so-called dividing wall between us and Christ and the Holy Spirit, or Isis and Osiris, it becomes paper thin. It nearly disappears. And the sources of divine mercy are allowed to then work with us much more closely. Why? Because our sense of helplessness, you can describe that as humility. We're no longer proud anymore, because we've lost our security inside of ourselves and between us. And humility opens the door for the divine mercy to flow. Okay, and that's what's happening now. So as a mystic and as a healer, what I sense very strongly in the last 5, 6, 7 years is that the divine mercy is looking for techniques like spiritual healing where they can transform people rather quickly and bring them away from this and bring them into a new consciousness which is built up out of empathy, transparency, and peacemaking and so forth. And as far as I can tell, this 7 treatments, which was completely inspired by John, has been favored by the divine mercy. Because what the divine mercy wants, as far as I can tell, and if I can be so brave to say this, the divine mercy needs what I call riverbeds. Now, if you take a riverbed is not the river, okay? And I, as a healer, I'm a riverbed. So I'm there that this river can flow through me, my faith, through my hands, through my heart, and into a client. So it's the river that heals, the river's mercy. Dascles was a massive riverbed. Jesus was the Amazon. Because they had no pride and they surrendered to a higher will. And what I teach in my education and what I do is we should all strive to become not only a very wide riverbed and not only a very deep riverbed, but a completely empty riverbed. That means no insecurity, no pride, no egoism from our side is going to block this riverbed. And then, so the divine mercy needs a riverbed who's not involved in the healing, except as a riverbed, which is fundamental to the river. I mean, can you imagine a river without a riverbed? It would just flow all over the place, like the Nile used to do, until they built the Nasser Dam. And then the divine mercy needs a good treatment form, and I teach about 10. And then the divine mercy needs a time span. The divine mercy doesn't need a time span, but we need a time span through which the divine mercy can then free us. And so when the dividing wall between us and the heavenly realms became paper thin, because it was time to change this, get rid of this actually. It looks like the divine mercy said, you know, we'll use the 7 treatments that John gave Paul and Paul teaches. We'll use it. And because we can then take these 7 treatments now, better it's 4 or 5 weeks instead of 3 weeks, because it's so strong now. And over the course of 6 months, 7 months, then we will transform people through the 7 treatments. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Incredible healing is taking place, both emotional and physical, because of the 7 treatments. So that's not a short talk, that's a longer talk about what I do. I teach the 7 treatments. I teach that with passion, and I teach that with love, and I love not only to teach it, but I love to do it, because for me, a lot of us who are on a spiritual path, we long to come into union with the mercy and love and trust and faith and hope and all these nice things. We long to sense the Christ in us. We long to sense Isis and Osiris or Shiva, Shakti in us, or the El Shaddai and the Shekinah. That's our goal. We want to experience that in a meditation in our daily life. And when somebody asks me, and I mean this, Paul, how many hours a day do you meditate? And this is how much fortune I have. I said, let me look at my calendar. Today I'm going to give 4 or 5 treatments. That's about 4 or 5 hours. Today I will meditate 4 or 5 hours. Because when I give a treatment, or all my students give these treatments, especially the 7 treatments, you are bathed in divine mercy as a healer. It just flows through you, and you are in union with it. In German you say Einklang. And it is one of the nicest things to do to heal, because you are just in full union with the divine. Passivity, I will add, is not easy, because a lot of you who are listening to this talk in America, Canada, or in Germany or in Austria or someplace else, you grew up in a culture defined largely by the Judaic-Christian belief system, and you are told from the moment you're born that you have to do something. You're told you have to be active. You have to do something. Then you go in the kindergarten, then you have to be more active. And then you go into the elementary school and you have to be even more active. Then you go into high school and you have to be more active. And then you go into college and then you're more active. And then you go into the economy and you have to be more active. All we learn is activity. There's hardly a moment that we learn that we are allowed to rest. We have a major problem, and it's linked to this. We have a major problem between existing and being. We don't, and this has to do with our split from the Divine Feminine, because we don't know how to relax. We don't know how to rest. And spiritual healing is all about that. Okay? So, some of you out there probably heal already. Some of you might be my students, I'm sure. Even in the States, I was teaching for a while, and through Scandinavia and through Europe. And you know what I'm saying, because you're probably leading people through the 7 treatments, and you know what a blessing it is to be there as a riverbed, because a riverbed is soaking wet with the river. Yeah. And if some of you are interested in being transformed, then my advice to you is find somebody who can lead you through the 7 treatments. On my website, which is Okay. My website is www.theosis. It's a Greek word which has to do with divinication, union with God, theosis.com. Then you'll see a list at the bottom of the page of healers in America, Japan, and all through Europe who are trained in this 7 treatments. Okay, and you'll also, if you're interested in learning the technique in Europe, then I teach it. I'll be teaching it in Austria in April, and I teach it here in my seminar room, and I teach it also sometimes in Denmark in English. And I'm going to give a short talk now following this talk about how I'm open to, it would be my honor to fly to the US, to Los Angeles, and teach then a healing retreat based on this technique. But I'll record that separately after this. Okay, I wish you all a very peaceful and joyous Easter time. And I thank you for taking the time to listen to this rather long talk. Okay, all the best.